Hello, in this video I'm going to build the landscape that formed the start of Project Pegasus. So to start with, I'm going to add down a height field. That's going to create this geometry node with a blank height field inside. Let's hit F to center that height field in the viewport. With Project Pegasus, I knew I wanted to make a large environment, something natural with rolling hills, but I also didn't want something too big, something that was too massive and unwieldy to work with. I just wanted enough space where I could have a nice looking environment and then have space to allow the project to kind of grow and develop in. So I decided to make an island because then I knew that space was enclosed and I had some boundaries to work within. So I'm going to make this height field 4,000 by 4,000 units, so that's 4 kilometers wide. And then within this, I'm going to build an island. So to do that, I'm going to drop down a curve node. And with the height field still displayed in the viewport, I'm going to select the curve and then either hit return whilst hovering over the viewport or click this show handles icon. And that will allow me to draw a curve in the viewport. So I'm going to draw out the shape of the island. And we haven't got to be super accurate here, just something that's kind of a bit of an interesting shape. So we've kind of got some concave and convex shapes. And we're just going to draw out an island. And you don't need to be super detailed. You know, just matter there's some straight lines. We're going to kind of roughen it up with some noises in a little bit. And let's hit either escape to close that curve tool or click on this little camera icon so we can now orbit the camera again. Let's take a look at that curve. Okay, currently it's reversed. So let's add a reverse node to flip it. There we go. Now let's add a poly extrude so we can give this some depth. Obviously we're quite far zoomed out, we've got a very large island, so let's increase this and do a little bit more. There we go, 60. So this will be the cliffs that run along the edges of the island. I'm going to give them a little bit of a slope. So let's inset these. That's a bit too much. Try 25. Okay, that'll do. And now off this height field, I'm going to add a height field project, and then plug in that poly extrude. And now we can see that shape projected into the height field. I'm just going to come back to this height field, and I'm going to turn down the resolution. So I'm going to set this to by axis, and that's set the grid samples to 512. And if the middle mouse click on the height field node, we can see that's set to a resolution of 512 by 512. So if we were to export this, this would be a texture that's 512 by 512 pixels. Now on this island, I want to have some mountains. This is to kind of give some depth from where the player is standing. They can look across this nice landscape with these large cliffs. They can see a few close to us and then some off in the distance. And these can also be used as visual landmarks for if the player was navigating around this large landscape, they've kind of got these big landmarks so they can orientate themselves on the island. So I'm going to add a merge after this poly extrude and then drop down a tube. So it's set to polygons and again selected in the viewport. I'm going to hit return so I can see the handles. Obviously it's very small at the moment, so let's increase the height of this. I'm going to set it to 350 and set the radius to 50 and 50. There we go. Now I can see it in the viewport. Currently it's under the ground, so I'm going to move it up just so that it's flush kind of with the height of the landscape, so it's still intersecting with the height field. And then I can grab these handles at the bottom of the cylinder to bring out that bottom radius. Now if I add that to the merge, you can see I've now got that projected in the height field. I need to come to the tube and click end caps. So it's close to the top and the bottom. And I'm going to increase the columns to 100. So there we go, we have a mountain now on the island. And we can continue to manipulate this and place it where we want. So I'm going to add a few different mountains. So let's move this one over here. And I'm actually going to duplicate that and reattach that to the merge and move this one over as well. So let's move this over here. And let's make a third mountain. And this one I want to be much bigger. So I'm going to move that up here and expand that radius even further. This one I'm just going to reduce the height a little bit. Duplicate it again. And then extrude this up and bring in that bottom radius. So this this mountain has now got this shallow slope, and then it kind of becomes steeper at the peak, just to give a bit of a different shape to this mountain. Oops, currently that mountain is coming off the edge of the island, so to move those together, what I'm going to do is copy the parameters of this smaller tube and then paste relative reference onto the larger base. And now I can move those together. Bring that radius in a little bit. Oops, it also looks like that's hovering a bit too high. It's coming off the top of the landscape, so let's move that down as well. Okay, that's a good starting point. So that's kind of roughly the design of the island. Obviously, the great thing about Houdini is that this is all procedural, so at any point I can kind of come back and make changes and adjustments as needed to kind of get the look and feel that I want. So this island currently doesn't look very natural, it's quite geometric, so I'm going to add some noises to kind of roughen up this landscape. So I'm going to drop down a heightfield noise, and I'll add some noise to this landscape. I don't want this noise to be on the seabed areas, I want it just on the island, so I'm going to create a mask from this geometry. So off the heightfield project, I'm going to add heightfield mask by geometry, and on the second input, I'm going to plug in the geometry. And there we can see I have just the island masked out. And if I plug this into the second input on the noise, I now have just that noise on the island. I want a bit more of a fall off to this, so on the heightfield mask by object, I'm going to add a heightfield mask shrink and use that to shrink the mask. Let's put that to 100, and that's just brought that mask in from the edge of the island. Now I'm going to add a heightfield mask blur. That blurs the edge of this mask. Let's increase that to 100, let's do it even further, 400. There we go, now that's kind of reaching the edge of the island. And I'm going to plug that into the second input on the heightfield noise. There we go, we now have a nice soft fall off to that noise. I'm going to change that noise type to Wally Cellular F2 F1. Let's turn off the grid. Currently that's pulling down some parts of this island. I just want to be positive. I just want to be lifting up the island. So let's uncheck center noise. There we go. Now that's all moving in the positive direction. Now let's reduce this amplitude a little bit. So let's bring it down to 200. And it's a little bit too noisy. So I'm going to increase this element size. There we go. So now we've just got some nice large kind of cracks running across the island, just to help break up some of those mountain shapes. And we can layer on additional noises. So let's add another heightfield noise and plug in that mask again to the second input. And this time I want it to be a much kind of more toned down noise, a lot more subtle. So I'm going to bring the amplitude way down, to 90, and then decrease this element size. Just adds a little bit of texture. And now I want to add some distortion to break up the outline and shape of this island. So let's add a heightfield distort by noise. We can see that start to roughen up this edge, but we need to increase it a little bit more. Currently the element size is very small, so I'm going to increase that as well. And there we go, we can start to see we kind of get a nice roughed up edge running along the shape of this island, and now those mountain shapes look a bit more like mountains. Set the amplitude to 140 and the element size to 800. And then we have the basic shape of the island. So now we're ready to start adding some erosion to this landscape. Now before I start doing that, I would like to take a look at some reference. So we were heavily inspired by the kind of Scottish Highlands, kind of rough, dramatic looking landscape. And I always like to try and find some similar landscapes to kind of compare my landscape to. So here we have a smallish island. Let's have a look at its width. So this is roughly around 4 kilometers, 4 kilometers wide. And if I hover over these raised areas, we can see in the bottom right hand corner here, we see a readout of the height above sea level. We can see these are around 380, 350 meters above sea level. So this gives us a rough idea of what a landscape might look like. And so for the size of island that we're looking at and making, I know I'm not going to want snowy peaked mountains that are exceptionally tall. We're looking at something similar to this kind of landscape. So we can come back to our scene and add a heightfield remap. And then if I click compute range, we can see some information about this landscape. Currently its lowest point is -3-4 meters, and the highest peak is around 373 meters. And I can remap that to match a desired height. So now I know the tallest point is 400 meters above sea level. And I can use heightfield remap nodes just to adjust and set how tall this landscape is. Now I'm ready to add a heightfield erode. Check freeze frame, and I'm going to set that to frame 10. Let's take a look at that heightfield erode. Okay, so we can see we've got some erosion, we've got some debris building up, and some rivers forming. Now I'm going to bring down the freeze it frame value down to 5. And I worked over 5 frames just as a way of kind of speeding up the simulation time. I'm not eroding over quite so many frames, so I get a bit of a quicker response as I'm changing parameters. And so because I'm working over a much shorter period, I don't get quite as much erosion on the landscape. So what I can do is increase the erodibility to get an increased effect. And if you remember from the previous video, this erosion rate is a multiplier of this erodibility. So first of all, I'm just going to set this erosion rate to 1. So now this erodibility isn't being multiplied by 0.4, it's been multiplied by 1. That will have increased the erodibility. Now nothing's updated in the viewport, and that's because I need to hit reset simulation. Rather than having to keep clicking this button, I'm going to come over to the simulation tab and uncheck cache simulation. So now if I come back over to main, I'm going to increase this erodibility a bit further to 1.1. And now that's updated in the viewport, I didn't have to hit this reset simulation. So now that I've increased the erodibility, we're seeing some of these channels become deeper, and I'm getting more incisions into the landscape, which is what I want. I want to have some nice kind of big valleys forming to carve up those initial shapes that I created. If we hover over these labels, we'll get some information about these parameters. We can see here bank angle, it says lower values would make wider and flatter river channels. So let's try increasing the river channels by reducing this number. So I've reduced that to 20 and we start to get some wider channels and we're having some more debris build up. Now I want a lot more water on this landscape to help increase the erosion. So I'm going to come over to the advanced tab and come down to precipitation and increase this amount. I'm going to set it to 0.9. And there we go. Now we can see a lot more water on this landscape, and that's going to increase the erosion, and hopefully some of these channels will get even wider. Now I'm going to come back over to the main tab, and I want to increase the speed and distance the water is spreading. So I'm going to increase this spread iteration to 140. Now we see more of this water kind of spilling and reaching the edges of the island. So we see this water spreading much further. I'm just going to temporarily set this erodibility for hydro down to 0, so you won't get any hydro erosion. And now we'll see just the thermal erosion. We can see this debris building up from some of the thermal erosion on these higher peaks. I actually don't want that much thermal erosion, I want to reduce it. Rather than reducing the erodibility, what I'm actually going to do is increase this cut angle, and that will mean that only the steepest slopes will get erosion. So I'm going to set this to 50. There we go, that's drastically reduced the erodibility. We're only going to get it in these kind of much steeper slopes here. Let's reset that erodibility to 1.1. And I think that's a good start. I've got some nice big features, some nice valleys forming, and these large bodies of water pooling and kind of spilling off the edge, starting to create these kind of valleys to the shoreline. Now, before I move on, I want to make sure I come back to simulation and recheck cache simulation. So that will cache this erosion, so now whenever I come back to it, I'll have the result cached and it won't recook every time I click the node. I'm going to add a heightfield remap and compute range. And this way I can just keep an eye on lowest points and highest points of the island, make sure they're not eroding too much and shrinking. I'm happy that they're okay. The tallest points haven't eroded too much. I actually want to bring down these peaks a little bit. I'm going to set this from 400 to 350. That's lowered the landscape. I feel that looks a little bit more natural than it did before. Let's add another heightfield erode. Again, I'm going to freeze this at frame 5. And when I'm working with these erosion tools, I like to think about these happening over, these happening very long periods of time. And think about the way the landscape around us are formed, happens over millions of years. We're talking about tectonic plates moving, ice ages coming and going, and these processes create very large geological features. And then we have more recent geological changes that erode these large features and break them down. So we kind of get this layering of large, medium, small features that occur over very long periods of time. So that's almost the way I like to think about these erosions, these different erode nodes. They're kind of happening at different periods of time, changing the landscape, and then when we add additional heightfield erodes, we're going to want to carve in and add different features as we go. I'm going to set the erosion rate to 1. Oh, that didn't update, so I'm going to come back over to simulation and uncheck cache simulation. And increase the erodibility to 1.5. Let's reduce that bank angle again. Try and get some wider rivers. Just check cache simulation again to save that. And we can see with this heightfield erode, we're beginning with the water and debris layers from the previous heightfield erode, and we're just adding to it now with additional erosion, but with different parameters. Now I want to carve much deeper channels. So rather than increasing the erodibility further, I'm going to go over to the advanced tab and increase the removal rate. I'm going to increase that all the way to 1. And you can see that's washed away a lot more of the debris, but it's also created these much deeper channels. And that's because that debris kind of inhibits erosion and protects the landscape. But as we remove it, there's less debris to protect the landscape, and we get much more erosion and much deeper channels. So now we can see quite a bit of a dramatic difference between the previous landscape and this additional erosion. So it's almost like time has passed, we've got less water, less rainfall, and instead those existing channels have been eroded away and deepened. I'm happy with these features that we've got. So I'm going to increase the resolution with a high-field resample. I want to double the resolution, so let's set this to a scale of 2. We can see now that's increased to a resolution of 1K, 1024 by 1024. I want to add some additional detail to this landscape, so I'm going to add a high-field distort by noise. And that just adds a little bit more detail to the landscape. I want to get a bit more distortion, so I'm going to increase the amplitude and increase the element size. So now that adds some distortion to the landscape, and we get some more interesting shapes. We can see this, it displaced the height field, but it hasn't displaced the water. But that's okay. When we run the simulation, the water will kind of run off back into these channels. Sometimes what I like to do as well is, rather than having a uniform amount of kind of noise and displacement across the whole landscape, it's actually to break it up using a height field mask. A height field mask by noise. Then we can create a mask and apply that, so we only get some distortion in some parts of the landscape and not in others. And that way, when we continue eroding, we get some variation in the channels that form. Some areas will be noisy, so we'll get more kind of winding channels. And some areas where it's smooth, we'll get more gentler kind of flowing channels. To increase the amplitude a little bit. And currently it's quite noisy, we've got quite a lot of roughness. So I'm going to reduce that roughness to 0. So we've just kind of got a nice gentle fall off to this mask. Now if we take a look at the heightfield distort, let's apply that. And now we have a bit more variety in the way that distortion is being applied to the landscape. And we can add now another heightfield erode. And so now we're working at a higher level of resolution. We should start to see some finer details appearing in this erosion. I'm going to set the frames to 5 again and check freeset frame. Yeah, and there we can see we've got some much finer details, some really nice channels and kind of waters, some really interesting shapes appearing on the landscape. I want to increase this erosion again to deepen these channels further. So again, I'm going to come over to the advanced tab and just increase this removal rate. Not quite so much this time, something like 0.6. Let's reset the simulation to update it. I'll just subtly deepen some of those channels as it removes more of the debris. Increase erosion a little more by increasing the precipitation, by increasing the rainfall. But rather than increasing the amount, I'm going to increase this density. And hit reset simulation again to update. So now got more water appearing on the landscape. So that's just subtly eroding some extra channels into the landscape. So amount is the amount of rainfall that is added to the landscape on each frame, whilst density is kind of how tightly packed those raindrops are. I want to do the same thing I did last time. I want to resample the landscape and also apply some distortion. So I'm going to copy those previous nodes and paste them after this heightfield erode, and then plug that heightfield erode into the resample. So we've increased the resolution further. We're now at 2048 by 2048, so we're at 2K. Also adjust this height field distort. I don't want to distort it quite so much because I'm now thinking about some very fine details. It's always a good idea to keep the scale that you're working at in mind. And a nice way I like to do that is if I add down a test geometry, the template body. So I like to place this on the landscape for reference, and that gives you a good idea of the kind of scale you're working at, just to keep it in mind as you're working. So to do that, I'm going to create a point to copy that geometry to. So I'm going to click add an add node, and we just want to add 1 point. I'm going to add a match size node, and I want to add that to the first input, and then to the second input, add the height field. I want to set the translation in X and Z to none, and then justify Y to max. And that will place this point above landscape. So it's now at the highest point. If I add a transform node after the add and before the match size, I can move this around, stay above the bounding box of the height field. Now if I add a ray node, and on the second input I want to add the height field, and I want to use this to ray this down so it's kind of sticks on the landscape. So for the direction, I want to set this to a vector. Currently it's got some expressions in here, so I'm going to right click and click delete channels. I'll clear out these expressions, and then I'm going to type -1. When I did that, you can see that ray cast down and hit the landscape. So now if I transform this, that's sticking and moving over the landscape. Now if I add a copy 2 points, I want to add the point to the second input and my test geometry to the first. Let's add a merge and merge in the height field. Just make the test geometry visible first. Now if I click the merge visible, we can see he's standing on the landscape. If I keep zooming out, and we can see how small he is. So now we start to get an idea of actually how big this landscape is, and how big some of these features are. And sometimes they're really important when we're trying to create these rivers and channels. It's always good to have an idea in your mind about how big they are. So when you're building a landscape that a player needs to walk across, you've got an idea of how big they are and how far they might have to travel. So that's just something I like to try and do sometimes if I really need to kind of understand the kind of scale that I'm working with. So moving back to this resample node, let's just add the null there and disconnect that to clean that up. So we can always add that back in if ever we need it later. So now I've got the previous erosion, I've increased the resolution to 2048, and now I want to add some additional noise and distortion. And as said, I always like to be mindful of the kind of scale that I'm working at. I don't want this to be too noisy, I want this to be very subtle. So I'm not adding too much noise to the landscape. Let's decrease its amplitude to 4. And then decrease this element size right down, say 50, and maybe a bit further 80. And if I think maybe this is in meters, the unit scale for Houdini, then this is displacing this landscape by 4 meters. And so compared to the size of a person, that's quite a bit. And that's how I like to keep in mind the kind of scale of the details I'm adding to the landscape. It's also just this high field noise. I'm going to reduce the amplitude to 1. Let's change the noise type to pull and flow. And we can also offset this as well if we want to have the noise in different areas. And so with that, I can add the last height field erode Now we're at a resolution of 2K, which is the resolution I want this high field to be at before I bring it into Unreal. I'm not going to do too much to this erosion. I just want to add some additional erosion at this high resolution so we get some more detailed debris and more detail in the water channels. So there we go, now we've got finer detail kind of filling these water channels. I don't want quite so much thermal erosion up here, so I'm going to reduce that erodibility under thermal to 0 and hit reset simulation to update. So I've got to a resolution now that I'm happy with, so I can always come back and make changes to this landscape. Just come back and just modify some of these mountains. I want this to be some steeper slopes. So before this third erosion, after this distort, I'm going to add down a height field remap. Now let's click compute range so I get the minimum maximum height of the landscape. I'm going to set the max to 400 to bring up that landscape to get it a bit taller. And I'm going to select both of these points and set them to B-spline. So now when I add a third point, I get this kind of nice smooth fall off. I just want to adjust this just so we get a bit more of a steepness to some of these edges. I want to set that interpolation to B-spline as well. Make sure they're all B-spline. So bring that distortion down a little bit as well. Reduce the amplitude to say 60. There you go, not quite so much noise. So it's going to give us some kind of cliff edges to these mountains, as we've got some much more steeper slopes. And let's now come down to our last high-field erode. So I'm almost ready to bring this into Unreal, but before I do, I just want to come over to this last high-field erode, and under the Layers tab, check Add Water to Final Height Layer, and that will kind of fill in some of these channels. And I'm not going to treat this as water on the landscape. I want this to be more like ancient riverbeds that have been the waters since gone. We've no longer got any rivers. We've just got the remains of the riverbed that are filled with debris. And that's also just trying to make it easier to navigate as a player rather than having these deep channels which you might fall into and not be able to get back out. Instead, we filled it in, and this will make some nice kind of areas to navigate between these larger mountains. So that kind of concludes this block out of the landscape. I'm next going to turn this into a digital asset and import it into Unreal.